They said he never left the smokehouse, not when the fires died, not when winter set its teeth into the fields, not even when the master himself forgot his name, but the smell never left him. It began, like all curses do, with hunger. In 1852, on a plantation tucked between the Black Rivers of western Tennessee, there was a man they called Jonah. The records describe him as large, slow, obedient. But those who lived there whispered another word: glutton. Jonah worked the smokehouse, a low square building of brick and shadow, where pork hung on iron hooks, and the air was always sweet with rot. He knew how to cure meat so it never spoiled, even in the dead heat of summer. They said he salted it with something finer than any man could buy, something that came from under the nails. By day he kept to himself. By night he sang, a low wheezing hum that rolled through the fields like smoke. No one knew the words, but the rhythm was the same, slow, patient, circular, like the sound of a knife being drawn across flesh. The overseers didn't like it, said it made the other slaves uneasy. One of them went out one night to tell Jonah to stop, but when he opened the smokehouse door, the singing stopped. He came back pale, shaking, saying Jonah was in there, sitting in the corner, but the light from his lantern couldn't find his face. It just slid off him, like oil on water. The next morning that overseer was gone. His horse was still tied outside. His whip still hung on the fence. Only the smell was new, thicker, sweeter. The master called it superstition. He ordered Jonah to smoke double the meat that week, said the harvest celebration would not wait for ghost stories. But something in the air had changed. Even the dogs wouldn't go near the smokehouse anymore. They'd sit in the dirt, ears flat, whimpering, staring at the door. When the celebration came, the tables were heavy with meat. Fat slabs of pork glazed with honey, ham so tender it fell apart at the touch. The master ate more than anyone, said Jonah was finally earning his keep, but that night the master woke screaming. Said something was crawling across his chest. Said it smelled like fire and brine. The doctor blamed fever, but his wife said she saw handprints on his ribs, deep, dark, as if pressed from inside the skin. Jonah was questioned. He only smiled. Said he smoked what the master brought him. Nothing more, nothing less. They searched the smokehouse after that. Found nothing unusual, just meat, dozens of slabs swaying gently from their hooks. But the air was heavy, thick with sweetness, like something alive was breathing through the walls. One of the field hands swore he saw a face in the hanging fat. Said the eyes were open, wet and glistening. Said it whispered his name. They laughed at him until the next morning when the slab was gone. Only a puddle remained, dark and slick, with something small floating in it, a single human tooth. After that, no one went near the smokehouse. But Jonah stayed inside. All night they heard him humming. All day the chimney smoked. And when the breeze carried that scent across the fields, the men said it smelled like burnt sugar. And something else, something copper, something alive. The master ordered the building burned. But when they tried to drag Jonah out, the door wouldn't move. The hinges screamed like metal bones, and the wood ran with sweat. Jonah spoke from inside, voice calm like a preacher whispering through a coffin lid. "Ain't no need," he said. "The meat's near done." They left him there. For 3 nights the chimney burned white, and on the 4th the smoke turned black as tar. When they finally broke in, the floor was wet, the air so thick it clung to the tongue. The hooks were empty and Jonah was gone, but on the far wall, scorched into the brick, was the print of a hand, massive, perfect, as if pressed there by something that had cooked from the inside out. The smell never left. Even years later, when the war came and the plantation was abandoned, travelers said they could still smell it, said it rose up from the soil itself, sweet and oily, like smoked flesh. And sometimes when the wind turned south, they'd hear a hum in the distance, low, patient, rolling across the fields like thunder in a throat. Local folklore calls him the Butcher of Murrell Hill, but the few surviving ledgers list no such name. Only a line of accounting dated the week before the fire. 1 slave, Jonah, property lost. Smokehouse destroyed. Cause unknown. But there's one final note written in the master's own hand. Barely legible, the ink warped by sweat or blood. The meat still moves, meat's beats violence. That smokehouse still stands, hidden beneath vines and ruin, half swallowed by the Tennessee earth. Locals say if you strike a match inside, the smoke won't rise. It hangs low, clings to you, crawls inside your mouth, and if you listen long enough, you'll hear him still, that humming, that wheezing breath echoing from beneath the dirt as if the fire never really went out. The smokehouse burned to its bones, yet the smell never left the air. Even after the rains came and washed the ash into the soil, the scent lingered. Sweet, metallic, thick. They said it clung to the house like breath on glass. The master, Silas Murrell, ordered the ruins cleared, though he refused to speak Jonah's name again. He told his men it was done, that whatever Jonah had been, whatever he had done, was over. But some fires don't end, they sink. Within days, the plantation's main hall began to sweat. The wallpaper bubbled. The air in the dining room carried the same honeyed odor as the smokehouse once did. And when Silas dined, he swore he could still hear the crackle of hickory wood. The harvest came, and with it the Feast of Plenty, a celebration Silas had hosted every autumn since inheriting the land. He spared no expense. Game, bread, barrels of wine, all laid out in long silver rows. But this year something was wrong. The cooks swore they could not find the right flavor. No salt held true, no smoke clung to the meat. Everything tasted flat. Lifeless. That was when a new hand appeared. A boy from upstate. He brought with him a small sack of black salt. Said it came from the ruins of the smokehouse. Said Jonah left it behind. The master should have turned him away. Instead, he smiled. And that night, for the first time since Jonah vanished, Silas Murrell's table was full. The guests remembered the taste. They remembered the softness of the pork, the richness that melted on the tongue. They remembered Silas watching them, hands folded, eyes glinting like wet amber in the candlelight. He ate slowly, deliberately, like a man savoring communion. But what they remembered most was Jonah's song, a low hum, faint but constant, echoing somewhere beyond the walls. Each note trembled the silverware, rattled the glasses. And though no one could find the source, everyone swore it came from beneath the floor. "You hear that?" one of the women whispered. "It's like someone's breathing under us." Silas smiled. "Let him breathe," he said. He earned it." They laughed uneasily. But the laughter didn't last. Around midnight, the master began to sweat. He wiped his brow, his neck. The napkin came away red. The air thickened. The candles dripped faster than wax should. And the smell, that same smokehouse sweetness, crept through the hall until the walls themselves seemed to exhale. One guest rose to leave but stopped at the threshold. Said the door wouldn't move. Said something pressed against it from the other side. Heavy, wet breathing. Then the lights went out. The room filled with the sound of chewing. Slow, deep, rhythmic. When the lamps flared again, the plates were empty. No food, no bones, only grease, pooling black as tar. Silas Murrell sat alone at the head of the table. His guests had vanished. Only their glasses remained, half full and trembling. He touched the table. It was warm, throbbing almost. From beneath the floor came a sound like a heartbeat, and through the cracks in the wood, the first drop of red fat rose like sap from a tree. By morning, the servants found him still sitting there, eyes open, mouth wet with grease. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't move. When they tried to lift him, his skin stuck to the chair. The doctor said it was fever, said his mind had broken. But one of the maids swore she saw his reflection smile before his face did. They carried him upstairs, but the smell followed, thick and sweet and alive. Every room he entered grew warm. The candles bent toward him, and at night he'd whisper in his sleep, lips slick with drool, "Don't let it cool. Don't let it cool." The servants began to leave. First the cook, then the field hands, then the housemaid who'd found a face as not her own, staring back from the silver tray she was polishing. Only one remained, Abigail, the nurse. She had been born on that land, and she said she'd seen evil before, but even she couldn't stomach what happened next. One morning she found Silas in the kitchen. The fire was lit, though no one had started it. He stood before the open hearth, hands clasped, humming. The same song. Jonah's song, and on the spit, turning slow, dripping, was something pale and round like a shoulder or a face. "Lord save us," Abigail whispered. "What have you done?" Silas turned. His lips were slick with grease. "I didn't cook it," he said. He did. Then he laughed, and a deep, bubbling laugh that rolled like smoke through the room. That night the mansion burned. They said it started in the dining room. The fire spread fast. eating through oak and velvet like dry kindling. But when the ashes cooled, the dining table still stood, untouched, blackened but whole, and in the center, upon the cracked silver plate, lay the master's tongue, bloated, still warm, still twitching. Locals say the fire didn't kill him. They say he became something else, something that still feeds. Each autumn, when the wind turns sweet and the moon dips red, travelers see the windows of the old Murrell estate flicker with light and smell the faint smoke of roasting meat. If you listen close enough, you can hear the table creak, as though someone still sits at its head, waiting for another feast. When the fire took the Murrell mansion, it didn't burn clean. Ash rose thick as fog, carrying with it the smell of pork and perfume of blood boiled sweet. For days afterward, travelers passing the ruins swore they heard something still moving beneath the char, a sound like breathing, and sometimes a hum. The estate was left to rot. No one rebuilt. The land grew wild, but the foundations stayed, black brick ribs jutting from the earth. And under those ribs, buried shallow, were the remains of the cellar. It was there the new owners found him, or what was left of him. In 1873, 2 decades after the fire, a surveyor named Elias Shaw purchased the land. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in profit, timber, cotton, and rail. He brought with him a small crew, half free men, half freedmen, and a preacher to keep them honest. They cleared the brush, mapped the streams, and planned to build new homes. But when they laid the first foundation stone, the ground beneath them groaned. At night, the men said they heard whispers, faint, slow, like someone speaking through wet wood. At first, they laughed it off, swamp gases, old pipes, imagination, but the sound grew clearer, closer. "You hear that, Eli?" one worker asked. "Sounds like singing." Elias crouched, ear to the floorboards. Something moved beneath, something that sighed. By morning, one of the men was gone. No sign of struggle, no prints, no blood. Only a thin film of oil on the dirt where he'd been sleeping, slick, black, and smelling faintly of smoke. They tried to keep working, but the preacher warned them. Said there were things that lingered where injustice once lived. Said the blood of the enslaved cries out to God, and sometimes something else answers first. Elias called him a fool, said ghosts don't leave fingerprints. But that night, when he returned to his bunk, he found the preacher's Bible open on the floor, and inside it, pressed between the pages, was a piece of fat, yellow, translucent, perfectly square, still warm. The next evening the whispering changed. It began to call names. Each man heard his own, soft, drawn out like a mother waking her child. One by one the crew left. By the 4th night only Elias remained. He couldn't leave. Something in him needed to know. He pried up one of the floorboards, struck a match, and held it over the dark. The flame flickered once, twice, and then went out, but before it died he saw it, eyes a pair, gleaming wet beneath the boards. Watching him, Elias stumbled back, heart hammering. He told himself they were animals. Rats, maybe, but the eyes didn't blink. They followed. The next morning the preacher's body was found in the dirt road a mile from camp. No wounds, no blood. But his face had been pressed flat, as if something heavy had crawled across him. When the sheriff came, he refused to enter the property. Said the air felt wrong, said it was like stepping into another man's breath. They ruled it an accident, closed the file. But Elias couldn't stop hearing the voice. Each night it grew louder, whispering, humming, sometimes laughing. Finally, he tore up half the floor. He dug until his hands bled, until the wood turned black and the soil ran wet. And just beneath the surface he found it, a space, a hollow chamber lined with stone. Inside, old iron hooks still hung from the ceiling, rusted, twisted, slick with tar. And on the far wall, half buried in soot, was a door, small, square, made of flesh-colored leather, stiff and cracked with age. He reached for it. When his fingers touched the handle, the whispering stopped. For the first time in weeks, the air was silent. Then, from behind the door, a single low hum. Slow, familiar, Jonah's song. When they found Elias the next day, he was standing in the smokehouse ruins, barefoot, eyes open, lips moving to a tune no one else could hear. He was humming, the same wheezing rhythm the old story spoke of. His men dragged him away, but the sound didn't stop. It came from the ground now, deep, like something feeding beneath the dirt. The sheriff ordered the house sealed, said no man should set foot on Murrell land again. But before he left, one of the deputies leaned down and listened through the cracks in the boards. He swore he heard Jonah's voice whispering to him clear as day. "The meat ain't done. Today the remains of that house still stand, half swallowed by vines and thyme. Locals say if you kneel and put your ear to the floor, you can still hear the hum, steady and slow, like the earth itself is breathing. And if you wait long enough, the boards beneath you will start to warm, as if someone down there is stoking a fire. By the time the year turned cold again, no one would work the Murrell land." The fields lay fallow, the fences half collapsed, and the air thick still, waiting. It was said the soil there had gone black, rich with something that was not earth. The locals called it the fat ground, because even after all these years it still glistened when the moon touched it. But hunger has a way of dulling fear. And when Thomas Larkin, a poor farmer from the next county, bought the land for near nothing, the townsfolk only shook their heads. He brought with him his wife, 2 daughters, and a sounder of pigs, 23 in all. He rebuilt a small cabin on the hill and said the past was dead. It wasn't. From the first night the pigs wouldn't sleep. They pawed at the dirt, pressed their snouts to the ground and squealed until dawn. Thomas blamed wolves, so he dug a trench and posted lanterns. But the pigs kept waking, their cries sharp, frantic, almost human. One morning his wife found the sow they called Old Bess standing at the pen's edge, her eyes milky white. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, just stared toward the ruins of the smokehouse, where the earth sagged inward like a scar. That evening Thomas heard her grunt, short, hoarse, but deliberate. Like speech. He froze, knife in hand, listening. The sound came again, soft, stretched, wet with breath. It said his name. Tom. Yes, he told himself it was wind, that the pig's throat had caught a branch or maybe a frog. But when he stepped closer, her mouth opened and slow, trembling, and she whispered again, clear as a prayer, "He's hungry." Thomas stumbled back. He watched the sow's belly ripple, as though something moved beneath her skin. Then came the sound, faint but unmistakable, a hum, Jonah's hum. That night Thomas tried to slaughter the pig. He bound her legs and drew the blade. But the knife slipped, not because his hand failed, but because the fat seemed to push back. The steel bent, as though the flesh itself refused to break. Then, from deep inside her throat came a voice, not hers, not human, but wet and smiling. "You can't cut what's already been cured." The lantern shattered. The pen erupted. When the smoke cleared, Old Bess was gone. The next morning the other pigs were found dead, bellies split, mouths full of black soil. The ground beneath them steamed, slick with something sweet. Thomas followed the trail to the smokehouse ruin. There, half buried in the mud, lay the sow. Her body was swollen, the ribs wide as barrels, and from her open mouth hung a rope of meat, human-shaped, red, still pulsing. His wife begged him to leave the land, but Thomas refused. Said he wouldn't be mocked by superstition or shadows. He burned the carcass and salted the ground. The air filled with that same scent, honeyed, metallic, suffocating. It clung to their clothes for days, but fire does not purify what's already claimed. That night, when the family sat to eat, the youngest daughter asked, "Papa, where did the ham come from?" He froze. There hadn't been meat in weeks. His wife looked down. The plate before her was full, dark slices glistening, still warm. Thomas pushed the dish away. But before he could speak, something moved in his mouth. A small sharp point pressed against his tongue. He spat it out onto the table, a tooth not his own. By dawn, his wife and daughters were gone. The house stood quiet, save for the low hum beneath the floor. Thomas sat at the table, staring at the empty plates. Flies gathered in thick black clouds, landing on the grease that would not dry. He stood, trembling, and opened the back door. The pig pen was empty, every post gnawed, every trough overturned. And across the field, the smokehouse ruin glowed faintly in the morning light. Steam rose from its chimney, though no one had tended a fire there in 20 years. He walked toward it, slow and barefoot, as if something pulled him forward. Inside, the air was wet and sweet. The soot had been scrubbed clean. And hanging from the rafters were slabs of new meat, thick, pale, breathing. He reached out, hand shaking, and pressed his palm to the nearest one. Warm, soft, almost human. From behind him came a whisper, the voice of Old Bess, gentle now, motherly. "Don't you see, Thomas? "We've all been fed." He turned. The doorway was gone. The walls had closed in and soft, pulsing alive. He screamed as the hook swung down, gleaming in the dark. When travelers found the cabin weeks later, it was empty. The pigs were gone, the family vanished, but the field had changed. New grass grew there, thick and strange, slick with dew that glimmered black in the sunlight, and sometimes, when the wind passed through it, it carried the sound of a voice, slow, heavy and content. "He's fed. He's fed." They buried what they found of Thomas, a single hand, cured and leathery, clutching a bent knife. The county sealed the land again. But locals say that if you walk the field at dusk, you'll see the shapes of pigs moving through the mist. And if you listen closely, you can hear them whisper. Some call it wind, others call it hunger. But every now and then one of them grunts just loud enough to be clear, "Jonah." The field never stayed dark for long. Even under moonless skies, something in the soil gleamed faintly, as though remembering fire. When the wind swept low, it brought with it a scent that was not rot, not smoke, but meat, warm, sweet, preserved. By the time the new overseer arrived, Mr. Barrow, a man of sharp boots and sharper temper, the locals refused to go near the Murrell place. He laughed at their stories of singing pigs and vanished farmers, said fear was for children and slaves, not for men who worked the land. So he stabled his horse beside the old smokehouse, hung his lamp high, and began his survey. He did not notice how the flame bent toward the earth, as though something beneath it breathed. Barrow was a man of appetites. Every night he ate alone in the big house that stood rotting at the hill's crest. He dined on salted pork, drank sour whiskey, and stared at himself in the black window. Sometimes he thought he saw another face there, broader, rounder, smiling faintly. When he blinked, it was gone. The servants whispered that he kept hearing footsteps in the hall. But when he searched, he found only flies, dozens of them, resting on the walls like seeds. He beat them away with his cane until the walls bled dark streaks. That night the flies gathered again. Only this time they didn't land on the walls. They landed on him. He awoke to the weight of something heavy on his chest. The room smelled of smoke and salt. He couldn't move, his limbs stiff, his breath shallow. Then from the far side of the room a sound began, a hum, low at first, then swelling, circling him, filling his skull. It was the same rhythm the workers used to sing when curing meat in the smokehouse, a song of preservation. Barrow's eyes darted toward the corner. There, by the faint orange light of the dying fire, stood a shape. Round shoulders, thick arms, eyes gleaming like wet coals. The fat slave, Jonah. He smiled, wide, unhurried. And though his lips did not move, his voice seeped through the air, slow and patient as dripping grease. "You mock what you've eaten." Barrow tried to speak, but only a hoarse whimper escaped. The thing stepped closer. Its feet left no prints, only smears of something black, glistening, alive. "You think hunger ends when the body's gone," Jonah whispered. "But hunger was all I ever was." The lamp burst. The room went red. At dawn, Barrow's horse was found wandering the field, its eyes gone, its hide slick with a film of salt. The front door to the mansion hung open, swinging gently in the breeze. No one answered when the sheriff called out. When he entered, the dining room was still set, a full plate of meat untouched, and a single shadow stretching across the wall. But there was no body to cast it. They said the shadow stayed there for days, slowly moving, though the sun never touched it. Children dared each other to look at it after dark. Those who did claimed it shifted, swelling, breathing, sometimes turning its head. One swore he saw it smile. By the third night the shadow began to spread. It crawled across the walls, dripping like oil. When the sheriff returned, the room was empty, save for one boot and a stain shaped like a man on the ceiling. The Murrell house fell quiet again. But travelers passing on the road said that when the sun went down, a figure could be seen standing by the smokehouse, not moving, not speaking, just watching, and wherever his gaze fell, the darkness thickened. Farmers noticed their lanterns burning dim near that field. The flame bent toward the ground, the same way it had for Barrow. One man said his own shadow began to stretch at sunset, longer, heavier, until he could feel it pulling at his back like a weight. He left town before dawn, never to return. By the next year, no one spoke Jonah's name aloud. The Murrell land was fenced off again, left to the crows and the whispering grass. But some nights when the moon was high and red, the shadow still returned. It began at the edge of the field, a low, shimmering pool, like oil in water. Then it grew, stretched, split, until the shape of a man emerged, dragging its darkness behind it like a cloak. Jonah walked again. Not fully flesh, not yet ghost. Something between smoke and fat, between hunger and memory. He carried no chains now, only the echo of his old breath, that wheezing hum that rose like a curse through the night air. He moved toward the mansion. The windows reflected him wrong, showing not his body but the faces of those who had eaten of him. Barrow, Larkin, Murrell, each smiling, each chewing. He raised his hand, and the walls began to drip. Pictures ran. Mirrors clouded. The house sagged, heavy with unseen weight, and when he spoke the whole field seemed to bow beneath the sound. Feast with me. By morning the house was gone. Only the chimney stood, and even that leaned soft with ash. In its place, a hollow depression, a perfect circle of blackened grass. Locals said it was a sinkhole, but those who crept close enough swore the air above it shimmered with heat, as if a fire still burned below. And if you stood long enough, your shadow began to thicken at your feet, rooting you there, dragging you slowly down. They called it the Pit of Jonah, the place where hunger became a god, and on windless nights, the ground hums, a low drone builds, the sound of something breathing beneath the soil. He feeds still. No one buried the master. No one could. What the storm left standing of the Murrell mansion was little more than blackened brick, and the memory of screams that wouldn't fade. Yet even as the wind cooled and the rains passed, something still moved in the air, a tremor beneath the quiet, like the low hum of a swarm preparing to rise. For 3 days, the sky above Murrell Hill hung thick with flies. They spiraled lazily in the heat, drawn not to flesh, but to something deeper, something breathing beneath the earth. By the 4th day, they began to gather in patterns. The first to notice was a preacher from the next county over, Reverend Joseph. He was sent to cleanse the grounds, or at least to calm the whispers spreading through the valley. He rode up the hill with a cross on his chest and a Bible in his satchel. But when he reached the ruins, his horse froze. The air stank of brine and sugar, the smell of cured flesh. Flies thickened around him, blackening the air like rain clouds. He wiped his face and looked toward the ruins of the smokehouse. And there he saw it, the doorway still intact, the wood around it slick and pulsing softly like something inside was still alive. He approached. The hum began. Inside, the smokehouse was darker than night. The Reverend raised his lantern, but the flame struggled, sputtering under the weight of the air. The floor glistened, and along the rafters, the flies clustered in lines, perfectly straight, perfectly still. There was no carcass. No bones, no remains of the slave called Jonah, only hooks, hundreds of them, empty, yet dripping. Clay reached for the nearest one. The metal was warm. Then, from behind him, a voice spoke. "You came to bless a table that's already been set." He turned, but the door was gone. The wall behind him had closed. The light flickered, and in its flash he saw what hung before him. Not meat, not animal, but the outline of a man, vast, head bowed, his form made entirely of flies. The swarm trembled, whispering as one, a voice that didn't sound like speech but like chewing. He fed them once. Now they feed him. Clay dropped his lantern. It shattered. Flames licked across the salted floor, hissing against the wet air. But the figure did not burn. It only leaned forward, the flies parting around what might once have been a face. "Hunger never dies, Reverend. It just changes mouths." They found him the next morning, wandering the road barefoot, his tongue black, his hands shaking, as if they remembered holding something heavy. He wouldn't speak, only hum. The same tune the slaves once sang while curing pork in the smokehouse. Within a week, the Reverend was dead. His house filled with flies. His wife said they crawled from his throat when he tried to pray. Word spread like infection. No one dared go near Murrell Hill now. But the flies began to travel, drifting downwind toward the nearby town of Dyer's Creek. At first, people ignored them. It was summer, after all. But when they found the local butcher with his belly split open and his ribs shining like wet ivory, they stopped laughing. The meat in his shop had gone missing. Every cut, every cured ham, every link of sausage, gone. In their place, slabs of something else. flesh that looked human but glistened too dark, too oily, as if soaked in shadow. The sheriff shut the place down, but each night more flies came. They covered windows, mirrors, even the church bells, and by morning they left behind something worse, a thin film that smelled of salt and smoke, and bore the faint outline of teeth marks. One night, a boy named Caleb Murphy stayed awake past midnight, watching the flies gather on his bedroom wall. He said they moved with purpose, not random but forming shapes, letters. They spelled one word, eat, he screamed. When his mother burst in, the flies were gone. But the word remained, carved deep into the plaster, as though written with something sharp and wet. By dawn, the Murphy family was gone. The neighbors said the house smelled like cooked meat, but no fire had burned. The county tried to cleanse the land. They burned the smokehouse, they salted the field, they even cut down the old pecan tree that grew near the ruins. But every time the wind shifted, the flies returned, fewer, slower, but thicker, as if pregnant with something unseen, and when they gathered you could hear it again, what that hum. Not a buzz, not wings, a voice, low, patient. The same song Jonah once sang while salting the master's flesh. All shall eat and be eaten. The sheriff swore he heard that line himself one night while standing guard. He fired into the dark, and when he turned his lantern toward the smoke, he found something moving in it. A fat silhouette grinning wide, its eyes like two burning knots of lard. The sheriff dropped his gun and fled. By morning he'd gone mad, laughing, gnawing his own hand raw. When they buried him, the coffin buzzed for days. Now, when the air turns heavy over Tennessee hills, the locals shut their doors and cover their mirrors. They say reflections attract the swarm, because the flies remember faces, and when they come, you'll smell it first, that thick sweetness, like cooked pork left too long in the sun. Then the hum begins, and something wet presses against your window pane. Not rain, breath. Some say the flies aren't just insects anymore, that each one carries a piece of Jonah's hunger. Each one a speck of his soul, feeding, watching, waiting for the next feast. And though the mansion is long gone, the field still hums. If you dig deep enough, beneath the salt and ash you'll find the ground slick, still warm. And if you listen close, too close, you'll hear chewing, slow, steady, eternal. By the time autumn crept across Tennessee, the Murrell land had gone silent. No birds, no crickets. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath when it passed over those fields. But silence has its own kind of sound, a pressure that builds until something breaks. And one night it did. The moon rose wrong, too red, too large, as if swollen with blood. The old folks in Dyer's Creek called it the slaughter moon, said it came once every 100 years, and that under its light the earth remembers what it's eaten. It began with the livestock. The cows wouldn't graze. The pigs refused their troughs, and in the dark corners of barns their eyes glimmered faintly, not animal, not human but aware. By midnight the flies had returned, thousands of them, not from the sky this time, but from beneath the soil. They burst from the ground in black fountains, spilling across the fields like a tide of ink. And somewhere below, something hummed. The preacher's grave split open first, then the sheriff's, then every man who'd stood on that cursed land since the fire. The ground pulsed soft as flesh, and in the heat of that red moonlight, the air shimmered like boiling water. A traveler on the ridge claimed he saw a figure walking among the mounds, massive, misshapen, its shadow stretching wider than the trees. It carried no lantern, yet its path glowed faintly, as if the earth itself was lighting the way. He said it paused once, turned toward the towns, and smiled. By dawn, the traveler was found dead, his eyes open, his lips greasy. Back in Dyer's Creek, the townsfolk locked themselves inside. But locks mean nothing to hunger. The first to hear it was a widow named Martha Lyle. She woke to the sound of humming, soft, slow, rising through her floorboards like a lullaby. She pressed her ear to the wood and heard chewing. Then something cracked. The boards beneath her knees bulged upward, once, twice, and then split open. From the dark crawl space below, a hand reached out. Not human, not fresh. Its skin gleamed like salted fat, its fingers short and blunt, as if made for grasping meat. It found her ankle and pulled. They found her the next morning in her chair by the fire, untouched save for one detail. Her feet were gone. By the next night the moon was almost full. The town stank of brine and iron. Every mirror in every house had fogged over, though the air was warm and dry. At the church, the bell tolled by itself. The pastor found the rope slick with grease and something written on the bell in black salt. The table is set. He fled, but by morning the church was filled with flies. They coated the pews, the altar, even the cross itself. When the sun rose, they scattered, and what they left behind was worse. On the wall above the pulpit, a handprint, huge, greasy, perfectly centered. The Murrell fields began to move. The soil swelled and sagged like breath. Those who dared ride past said they saw the ground ripple, like something vast was stirring below. And when the moon finally reached its full red bloom, the singing began. It came from the earth itself, a low, wordless chant, thick and wet. The same rhythm the slaves once sang in the smokehouse. Those who listened too long said they could taste it, salt and fat and blood. Then came the smell, the air filled with the scent of meat cooking, rich, intoxicating, enough to make even the devout salivate. In every home, people felt their stomachs twist. Children cried with hunger. Old men clawed their throats as if choking on invisible food. And when the moonlight hit their faces, each one smiled the same smile. Wide, wrong, glistening, they rose as one. Walked barefoot to the fields, hundreds of them, silent as sleepwalkers. The moon shone on their faces, and in its light the ground split open. What crawled out was not Jonah, not as they'd known him. It was larger, formless, its flesh shifting like smoke and fat rendered in heat. Eyes blinked across its surface, dozens of them, each reflecting the moon, each hungrier than the last, and in a voice that was every whisper, every hum it spoke. "Come, eat." The crowd fell to their knees. Some screamed. Most didn't. They began to crawl forward, hands sinking into the soft, warm soil. Some said they were pulled. Others said they volunteered. The thing spread its arms, and the flies descended like rain. The field erupted in black wings and red moonlight, and the sound of chewing drowned out the wind. By morning, the town was empty. The fields were flat again. Only a single table remained, a long wooden one set with silver plates, each filled with a cut of meat that steamed faintly in the cool dawn. No one knows who set it. No one knows what the meat was. But the plates never cooled, and no matter how many times they were taken away by dusk, they'd return full again. The people stopped going near Murrell Hill. They said the moon would come back red again one day. And when it did, Jonah would rise once more, to finish the meal that never ended. They say the land was finally sold in 1903. No one local bought it. The county was too afraid. It was a banker from Nashville, Mr. Edwin Cole, who thought the stories were superstition. He built a new house on the old Murrell site. He brought in bricklayers, carpenters, servants, and a private cook. He told the papers he would bring dignity back to Tennessee soil. He didn't know what slept beneath it. The workers whispered that the ground still sweated, that when they dug the foundation, their shovels struck not clay but something soft and warm like muscle. One man said the earth pulsed under his boots. Another swore he heard a heartbeat through the dirt. Mr. Cole dismissed them all. He paid extra to anyone who stayed past sundown, and by summer's end the mansion stood tall again. White columns, new shingles, clean windows. They even rebuilt the smokehouse, a perfect replica, and when the cook fired it up for the first time, the wind changed. It started small. The smell, sweet, smoky, familiar. The same scent that had haunted the fields for 50 years. The servants said it made them dizzy, that it lingered too long, that it tasted like hunger itself. By the third week the house was full of food, roasts, hams, stews, more than any family could eat. Yet the master insisted the meals continue. A full house is a blessed one, he told them, but the servants began to notice something strange. Each night, no matter how much was eaten, the platters refilled themselves by morning, always warm, always steaming, always waiting. The first death came in October. A maid named Ruth. They found her in the dining room before dawn, head on the table, face pressed into a plate of pork. At first, they thought she'd choked. But when the coroner arrived, he found no food in her throat, only fat. Thick white fat, packed into her lungs like wax. When they turned her body over, grease poured from her mouth. Mr. Cole closed the house to outsiders. He forbade the servants from speaking about what happened. But that night the humming began again. It came from beneath the floorboards, low, rhythmic, familiar. The old smokehouse song. Each plank seemed to breathe with the sound. The air grew heavy and the mirrors fogged though no heat burned. When Mr. Cole awoke, he found the dining table already set. Not by human hands, but arranged perfectly precisely. Forks aligned, napkins folded, and sitting at the head of the table was a single chair pulled out, as if waiting for someone. The servants refused to enter the room. They said the plates were whispering, that if you leaned too close you could hear chewing, but Mr. Cole was a man of reason. He ordered the doors locked, the table covered, and the cook dismissed. That night he heard footsteps in the dining hall. He took his lantern and revolver, and when he opened the door he saw something that froze him where he stood. The plates were uncovered, each one full, and seated at the head of the table was a figure, massive, round, silent. It lifted its head, and the lantern light caught its eyes, wet, reflective, gleaming with smoke, the air filled with the smell of salt. And in a voice that seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves, it spoke, "Sit, master." They found Mr. Cole 3 days later. He was sitting at the table smiling. His eyes were open, his face slick with grease. Before him a half-eaten plate of meat in still warm. The doctor who examined him said his stomach was full to bursting. But not with food, with ash. After his death the house fell silent again. But travellers on the road began to whisper of strange lights glowing in the windows after midnight. They said they could see shapes moving through the dining room, dozens of them seated, bowing their heads, lifting invisible forks in unison. Every plate gleamed under the light of candles that never burned out, and at the far end of the table sat the fattest shadow of them all. Jonah, still smiling, still serving. By 1920, locals called it the House That Eats. The legend spread, a mansion where time stood still and dinner never ended. Some dared to test it. A group of college boys from Memphis broke in one Halloween. Only one came back. He said the moment they crossed the threshold, the air grew thick like walking into a throat. The walls sweated. The lamps burned red, and the table was already set for them. "We heard chewing," he said, "but we hadn't started eating yet." He never spoke again after that. His skin began to change, soft, glossy, like cured meat. He died 2 months later. They buried him in Dyer's Creek, but his grave too began to hum. Now more than a century later, the house still stands, abandoned but not empty. Locals say if you pass by on a still night, you'll see candlelight flickering through the windows. You'll smell roast and smoke and something sweeter, like sin cooking slow. And if you're foolish enough to step inside, you'll hear the floorboards breathe. You'll feel the warmth of the table. And you'll see him there, Hughes at the head, waiting. Jonah, the fat slave who fed the masters. Now master of the feast himself, he never speaks. He never moves. But sometimes, if you listen long enough, you'll hear your own name whispered from the shadows. And the next time you look at the plate before you, you won't remember who put the food there. Only that it's warm, and that you're starving. The house rotted slow, but the ground beneath it changed faster. By 1924, farmers miles away began to notice it first. Their soil turned black. Not dry, not burned, just dark, like something beneath was bleeding upward, and when the rain came it didn't wash away. It shimmered. Children who played in it came home with rashes that smelled like smoke. Animals refused to graze near the hill. And the locals, whispering as they passed, began to call the ground's new skin by one name: black salt. Old Mrs. Cora, who lived half a mile downriver, was the first to collect it. She thought it might cure what the doctors couldn't. "Jonah's blessing," she said, grinding it fine in her mortar and spooning it into broth. She fed it to her son, who'd been sick near to death. By morning his fever was gone, but his hunger wasn't. He ate everything in sight: bread, beans, chickens, the neighbor's dog. By the third night they found him in the smokehouse, chewing the walls. When they pulled him out, he was smiling. Word spread. The black salt became legend, a secret medicine, a hex, a miracle, depending on who you asked. It was sold in jars by the side of the road. Traveling preachers carried it to Memphis, to Nashville, to New Orleans. They said it healed wounds, made crops grow, and brought dreams of gold and honey. But the ones who used it always ended the same way: fat, bloated, eyes glazed with grease. They said they could hear someone humming under their skin. By the summer of 27, the county health office sent inspectors to Murrell Hill. They expected to find a chemical spill. Instead, they found salt veins, thick, black, pulsing through the dirt like arteries. When one of them cracked open a clod with his shovel, steam hissed out, and something whispered his name. He ran. The others weren't so lucky. 3 days later, their bodies surfaced in the creek, slick with oil, mouths open, tongues gone. The coroner said the flesh on their faces looked melted, and in each man's stomach, packed tight as sand, was that same black salt. After that, Murrell Hill was fenced off. The county condemned it, but they couldn't keep the curious away. By 1931, treasure hunters came, digging through the night. They said they were looking for silver veins. A rumor born from the shimmering ground. They didn't find silver. They found plates, dozens of them, buried deep, each one carved with faces, distorted, laughing, and under every plate a layer of fat, perfectly preserved. One man tried to take a plate home. By dawn he was gone. Only his boots remained. The sheriff found them at the edge of the field, still smoking. The town priest, Father Jennings, tried to cleanse the land. He sprinkled holy water and read from Revelation. The wind blew every candle out. When he reached the line about the beast that devoureth flesh, the ground split beneath him, and the smoke that came out smelled like dinner. The next day, the church bell tolled by itself. Each ring came slower, heavier, until the metal cracked. They buried what was left of the priest on higher ground, but the grave never stayed dry. Oil seeped through the soil, and the cross above it turned black. By the 1950s, they paved over the road to Murrell Hill. Locals swore it was the only way to contain it. But truckers passing that stretch at night still saw things. Fat men in ragged coats standing in the mist, holding lanterns that burned with yellow grease. Sometimes they'd wave, and if you didn't wave back, they'd follow your truck for miles, until the road behind you shone slick with salt. Historians now say there's no record of Jonah's existence. No documents, no records of sale, no burial site. But one thing remains certain. No plant has ever grown again on Murrell Hill. The soil refuses it. And under certain moonlight you can still see it shimmer, like something breathing just below the surface. Those who walk too close say the air thickens, like a kitchen full of steam. They hear the clatter of dishes in the dark. They smell roasted meat and sweetness, and when they turn around there are footprints, bare, enormous, leading straight back toward the hill. A professor from Vanderbilt once tried to test the soil. He disappeared 2 weeks later. When police searched his office, they found only one note written on his typewriter. "The salt is not of the earth. It is what remains when the earth eats." Now, nearly a century later, locals still won't say Jonah's name out loud. But they still use the salt, and in secret. A pinch to keep the harvest strong. For a line across the doorway to keep ghosts out. And always after using it, they whisper the same phrase under their breath. "He still serves." They say the curse ended with the soil. That the last breath of Jonah died beneath Murrell Hill, sealed by concrete, swallowed by time. But stories rot slow in the South. And hunger. Hunger has a way of finding a new mouth. In 1986, a traveler came through Tennessee, a folklorist named Edward Mullen, studying local ghost tales for the State Archive. He was quiet, polite, the kind of man who carried both a tape recorder and a Bible. He stayed at a roadside inn 20 miles from Murrell Hill. The owner, an old man with half a jaw, told him the story of the fat slave who cursed the land. He laughed it off until the innkeeper said, "You ever heard him sing, Mr. Mullen?" He's still humming under there. That night the folklorist couldn't sleep. The air outside his window smelled faintly of bacon and smoke. And from far off and somewhere beyond the tree line came that sound, a hum, low, slow, like a lullaby through grease and ash. By dawn he was driving. He followed the old highway until the road ended in a patch of cracked asphalt. Ahead lay nothing but weeds and silence, and a hill black as wet soot. A sign half buried in vines read, "Property of the State of Tennessee. No trespassing." He parked, stepped out and felt the air thicken. Each breath carried a taste, salt, iron, smoke. And beneath it all something sweet, like meat kept too long on the bone. He set down his recorder. The tape hissed. "Murrell Hill," he said. "Locals claim it's cursed. No vegetation. Odor of decay. Possible chemical residue. I'm approaching the slope now." The dirt crunched under his boots. Only it wasn't dirt. It glittered. He knelt, scooped a handful, and watched black grains roll through his fingers, catching the light. They were warm. Too warm. He brought them to his nose, and smiled. They found his truck 3 days later. Engine still running. Headlights still on. Inside, his recorder was playing. A faint hum beneath the static. Then to a voice, not his, not quite human. Just 4 words, wet and whispering. Eat and be filled. Months passed before they found his body, miles away in a field that hadn't grown crops in 50 years. He was sitting cross-legged beside a shallow pit, a rusted iron pot resting in front of him. The pot was still warm, half full of something thick, slick and dark. His lips were coated in grease. His eyes were open, glassy, as if he'd died smiling. On the ground beside him, scrawled into the dirt with one trembling hand, were 3 words, "He serves still." When authorities tested the contents of the pot, they found no animal residue, only trace elements of human fat, and fragments of what might once have been teeth. The soil around it had changed again, glimmering black, alive with tiny, shifting crystals that grew sharper each day. They paved it over. Again, but asphalt doesn't hold forever. Today the hill lies quiet, but truckers still talk. Late at night, when the fog comes down, they say they see a man walking the shoulder, bloated, barefoot, humming to himself. He carries something in his arms. Something round. Something steaming. And if you stop long enough, if you open your window to ask, he'll offer you a taste. They say no one ever refuses. They say the first bite tastes like home, the second tastes like sin. And by the third, you forget your own name. Every few years, a new patch of black soil appears along that stretch of highway, always near an old mile marker, always after a rainstorm, and always when the locals dig too deep they hit iron. Some call it a curse, some call it proof. But the old folks in Murrell County don't argue anymore. They just sprinkle salt by the door and say their prayer, "He still serves."